The morning sun blazed across the canopy of Captain James Mitchell's F-16 Fighting Falcon as he cruised at 35,000 feet above the Cascade Range. Below him, the landscape unfolded like a patchwork quilt, dense forests of green and brown, snow-capped peaks, winding rivers that caught the sunlight like silver thread. It was the kind of morning that made Mitchell grateful for his job, despite the stress and danger that came with it. He'd been flying fighter jets for 18 years, and moments like this never got old. Phoenix Flight, checking instruments. Mitchell radioed to the Air Traffic Control Center at Joint Base Lewis McChord, the military installation 70 miles to the north. His call sign, Phoenix, had been earned long ago during a harrowing training exercise when he'd managed to recover a severely damaged aircraft that everyone thought was lost. He wore the name with pride. "Copy that, Phoenix," came the response through his headset. "You're cleared to continue your training pattern. Weather's holding steady. No traffic in your sector." Mitchell smiled beneath his oxygen mask. This was exactly what he loved about the job, the freedom of the skis, the sound of two massive engines purring beneath him, the responsibility of commanding one of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built. His 14-year-old daughter, Sarah, had asked him last week why he loved flying so much. He tried to explain the feeling of weightlessness, the connection between man and machine, the way the world looked different from up here, smaller somehow, but also more beautiful. Sarah had rolled her eyes in that way teenage daughters do, but Mitchell knew she understood. She'd inherited his love of the sky. He began executing his training pattern, banking slightly to the west toward the designated airspace above the remote valleys and peaks. The F-16 responded to his touch instantly, a perfect extension of his will. The canopy was crystal clear, and visibility stretched for what felt like forever. Mitchell could see all the way to the Pacific Ocean in the distance, a thin blue line on the horizon. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as it should be. And then everything went catastrophically wrong. It started as a vibration, subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. Mitchell frowned and checked his instruments. All readings appeared normal. The vibration intensified. It became a tremor, then a violent shaking that rattled his teeth and blurred his vision. "Phoenix Flight Control, are you receiving?" Mitchell's hand instinctively reached for the radio transmit button, but before he could respond, his instruments exploded into chaos. The starboard engine, the right engine, had failed. No more than failed, it had catastrophically failed. The readout screamed at him in a cascade of red warning lights and high-pitched alarms that pierced through his headset like daggers. Engine temperature spiking, oil pressure plummeting, fuel flow interrupted. Mitchell's training kicked in instantly. He'd trained for this scenario 100 times. Engine failure wasn't the end, it was a problem to be managed. But then came the explosion. It wasn't a gentle failure or a controlled shutdown. It was a violent detonation that seemed to come from nowhere, tearing through the starboard side of the aircraft like an invisible fist. The entire jet shuddered violently, and Mitchell was thrown hard against his restraints. Pain shot up his spine. His vision swam. "Mayday, Mayday, Phoenix Flight declaring emergency," Mitchell shouted into his radio, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Starboard engine failure, catastrophic damage. I'm losing." Another explosion cut him off mid-sentence. This one was worse, much worse. The canopy cracked, and suddenly the roar of failing engines and tearing metal drowned out everything else. Mitchell's hands moved across his controls by pure instinct, but the aircraft had become a wounded animal, thrashing and dying beneath him. The control stick felt heavy, sluggish. Hydraulic fluid loss, the backup systems were failing too. Through the damaged canopy, Mitchell could see debris streaming behind him, a piece of his wing shredded and spinning through the air. The altimeter was unwinding rapidly. He'd been at 35,000 feet. Now he was at 32,000, 28,000. The aircraft was falling, and despite his best efforts, Mitchell couldn't stabilize it. Emergency procedures, eject. The thought crystallized in his mind with crystal clarity. He reached for the ejection handle between his legs, his fingers closing around the cold metal. This was it. This was the moment he'd trained for his entire career. Get out. Get away from the falling machine. Let the parachute do its job. He'd be down on the ground in minutes and rescue would find him. His hand was on the handle. His thumb was moving toward the activation switch. But then the aircraft pitched hard to the left and Mitchell's head snapped violently against the reinforced canopy frame. The impact was vicious, and for a moment, stars exploded in his vision. His grip loosened. The world tilted. He could taste blood in his mouth. The next thing Captain James Mitchell knew, there was nothing but darkness. The F-16 continued its descent, no longer guided by human hands. Its pilot was unconscious, slumped in the ejection seat, his head tilted back at an unnatural angle. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead and ran down his temple, disappearing into his flight suit. The aircraft's emergency systems automatically transmitted a distress signal. The beacon sent coordinates, aircraft identification, and data about the emergency to every military receiver within 300 miles. Fighter squadrons scrambled. Rescue coordination centers mobilized. Black Hawk helicopters began moving, but none of them knew the most critical piece of information, that the pilot was unconscious. None of them could hear Mitchell's voice providing updates or guidance. None of them knew where exactly he would come down, or in what condition he would be when they arrived. The F-16 screamed through the sky at a steep angle, trailing smoke and fire. At 18,000 feet, the outer skin began to peel away from the frame. At 15,000 feet, the remaining engine sputtered and died, leaving only the rush of air and the groan of dying metal. The forest below grew larger, detail by detail. Individual trees became visible. Clearings appeared between the dense growth. Mitchell's unconscious body jolted with each gust of wind that hit the crippled aircraft. His hands dangled uselessly at his sides. The oxygen mask hung at an odd angle. There was no one at the controls now, no last-minute correction, no desperate attempt at recovery. At 8,000 feet, the nose of the F-16 pointed downward at a steep angle. The aircraft had less than 2 minutes before impact. At 5,000 feet, Mitchell's eyes remained closed, his body limp. At 2,000 feet, the canopy began to shred further, pieces breaking away and tumbling through the air. And then, with a sound like the world ending, the F-16 struck the forest floor in a remote valley 50 miles from the nearest town. The impact was tremendous, explosive. Trees that had stood for centuries were obliterated. The aircraft folded and twisted, metal shrieking against earth and wood. Fuel ignited in a secondary explosion that sent flames shooting 50 feet into the air. When the dust settled and the echoes faded, there was only smoke, silence, and the gentle sound of burning metal cooling in the mountain air. Captain James Mitchell lay unconscious in what remained of his cockpit, balanced between life and death, waiting for salvation he didn't know was coming. He had no idea that less than a mile away, a 12-year-old girl with a scanner and a brave heart would become his lifeline. The camping trip had been Emma Chen's mother's idea. Sarah Chen believed that her family spent too much time staring at screens, sitting in comfortable chairs, buried in suburban routines that left no room for adventure or connection. She'd announced 3 weeks prior that they were going to spend a long weekend in the Cascade Range, completely unplugged from civilization. No phones, no tablets, no Netflix, just the family, nature, and each other. Emma had groaned at the announcement, as 12-year-olds do when their parents suggest anything remotely inconvenient. A whole weekend without her phone, without texting her best friend, Megan, without the Discord server where all her friends were talking about the latest anime series. It seemed like a form of medieval torture. But her father, Robert Chen, had made a deal with her. If she came on the camping trip without complaining, he would let her bring one of his prized possessions, his aviation scanner. the handheld radio receiver that picked up military, civilian, and emergency frequencies from miles around. It was a compromise that made the entire weekend suddenly seem bearable. Emma had always been obsessed with aviation. Where other kids had posters of celebrities or anime characters on their bedroom walls, Emma had photographs of military aircraft, F-16s, F-18s, C-130 Hercules transport planes, and her personal favorite, the Apache helicopter with its fearsome array of weapons and sensors. She'd started learning about planes at age 7 when her uncle, a former Air Force pilot, had taken her to see an air show. From that moment forward, she'd been hooked. She devoured every book about aviation she could find. She'd memorized aircraft specifications, learned the phonetic alphabet used by pilots, and spent countless hours watching videos of cockpit footage from various military operations. Her parents thought it was a phase. It wasn't a phase. And so, on a warm Friday afternoon in late June, the Chen family found themselves driving up a winding mountain road toward their chosen camping site in the remote Cascade Valley. The area was relatively undeveloped, few people, few roads, and even fewer cell phone towers. It was exactly what Sarah Chen wanted: isolation and family togetherness. The campsite itself was beautiful, a small clearing beside a pristine stream, surrounded by towering Douglas firs and western red cedars that had been growing for centuries. The afternoon sun filtered through the branches, creating a patchwork of light and shadow on the forest floor. Emma's younger brother, David, who was 9, immediately ran toward the stream, fascinated by the smooth rocks and the possibility of finding crawdads. Their parents began unpacking the car, setting up the main tent and the smaller 2-person tent that Emma would share with David. Emma, however, had other plans. The moment they arrived, she'd set up her camping chair in a small clearing away from the main camp, the aviation scanner already powered up and adjusted to the military frequencies she'd programmed into it during the drive. The scanner chirped and crackled with distant voices, pilots communicating with air traffic control, emergency transmissions, routine check-ins from various airfields across the Pacific Northwest. To Emma, it was the sound of adventure. To her parents, it was her way of staying connected to her obsession, while technically being unplugged from the internet. "Emma, help us set up," her mother called from the camp. "In a minute," Emma replied, her ear already pressed against the scanner's speaker. She sat in that chair for the next hour, barely moving except to occasionally adjust the volume or frequency. The afternoon wore on. Her father started a fire for dinner. David returned from the stream, drenched and grinning, having successfully caught 2 crawdads that he promptly released. Her mother prepared dinner on a camping stove, hot dogs and beans, simple but satisfying. Emma eventually joined them, but her scanner remained within arm's reach. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emma remained in her chair, scanner still active. David had fallen asleep after dinner, exhausted from his explorations. Her parents sat near the fire, talking in low voices about work and life and the general ups and downs of existence. Emma barely heard them. The scanner had been nothing but routine traffic all day, until 4:47 p.m. A voice erupted through the speaker, different from the others, sharper, more urgent, tinged with barely controlled panic. "Mayday, Mayday, Phoenix flight declaring emergency." Emma's entire body went rigid. She'd never heard an actual emergency Mayday before, only heard them replayed on aviation history podcasts. The voice of Captain James Mitchell crackled with stress and adrenaline, reporting engine failure, catastrophic damage, loss of systems. "Did you hear that?" Emma called out, standing abruptly from her chair. Her parents looked up from their conversation, confused. Emma was already reaching for her father's hand. "There's an emergency. An aircraft is in trouble." Robert Chen took the scanner from his daughter, listening to the garbled transmissions. What had started as a routine flight was transforming into a crisis. Mitchell's voice described explosions, failing systems, cascading mechanical failures. Then just as suddenly, his voice was gone. The frequency filled with other voices, controllers responding to his last transmission, other aircraft providing their support, rescue coordination centers beginning their activation procedures. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, standing up beside her daughter. "That plane." Emma's mind was racing. She'd studied enough aviation to understand what was happening. An F-16 had experienced a catastrophic engine failure. The pilot had declared an emergency, and now he was either recovering the aircraft or he was going down. She looked at her father. "We need to call 911. Robert Chen nodded, his initial confusion giving way to parental responsibility. He immediately pulled out his phone, so much for being unplugged, and dialed the emergency number. The call connected, and he reported their location and what they'd heard. The dispatcher took the information, confirmed their coordinates, and thanked him. There were already rescue teams mobilizing, she assured him. They would be there as soon as they could. "Stay in your camp," the dispatcher instructed. "Do not attempt to locate the crash site on your own. Rescue personnel will handle this situation." But even as Robert acknowledged the dispatcher's instructions, Emma was staring at her scanner, calculating distances in her mind. They were in a remote valley. Rescue teams from the nearest base would take time to arrive, at least 40 minutes, possibly much longer depending on traffic and terrain. If the pilot had ejected, he could be anywhere in a 5-mile radius. If he hadn't ejected, she didn't want to think about that possibility. The sky above the valley suddenly changed. Emma looked up, her eyes widening. A flash of black smoke appeared above the tree line to the southeast. Not a small plume of smoke, a significant pillar, dark and ominous, rising into the evening sky like a funeral pyre. For a moment, the entire valley seemed to hold its breath. Even the insects stopped chirping. The birds went silent. "Did you see that?" Emma's mother gasped, pointing at the smoke. "The crash," Emma whispered. Her scanner continued crackling with increasingly frantic military transmissions. Coordinates were being passed. Rescue protocols activated. Black Hawk helicopters scrambled from Joint Base Lewis McChord, now in the air and heading south toward their location. Emma stood perfectly still, her young face illuminated by the fatting sunlight, her mind working through the implications. The crash site was closer to their camp than it would be to any rescue team arriving from the base. Maybe much closer. Within walking distance, she estimated, if you knew the right direction. The scanner continued its constant chatter. Military personnel checking in. Rescue coordination centers confirming dispatch. The voice of the Black Hawk flight commander, calm and professional, coordinating the response. But nowhere in those transmissions did Emma hear any confirmation that the pilot was alive. Nowhere did she hear any indication that anyone knew the condition of the man in that cockpit. She looked at her father, then at her mother, then back at the dark pillar of smoke rising from the forest. Then she looked down at the scanner in her hands. The device that had connected her to the world of aviation, the tool that had always brought her joy and fascination with the skis above, was now telling her that someone needed help. Someone was down there in that wreckage, and no one else was close enough to provide immediate assistance. Emma Chen, 12 years old, obsessed with planes, made a decision in that moment. She was going to find that pilot. Emma moved through the forest with surprising quiet and purpose, her small frame navigating between trees with the caution of someone who understood the seriousness of what she was doing. The scanner hung from her shoulder on its carrying strap. The volume turned low so she could hear the military transmissions, but not so loud as to alert any wildlife to her presence. Above her, the last rays of daylight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, and she used them as navigational guides, knowing the sun set in the west and the smoke had risen from the southeast. She'd told her parents she was going to scout the area, just to get closer to understanding what had happened. They'd protested, of course, her mother insisting it was too dangerous, her father warning her to stay close to camp. But Emma had been persuasive in the way that determined 12-year-olds can be. She promised to stay within shouting distance. She promised not to go near the crash site itself. She promised to come back immediately if she found anything. All of these promises, she'd already made the decision to break if necessary. The forest was darker than she'd anticipated. The canopy grew denser as she moved away from the clearing, and the undergrowth became more challenging. She had to step carefully over fallen logs, push through low-hanging branches, and navigate around thorny blackberry bushes that seemed designed specifically to impede progress. More than once, her foot caught on a root and she nearly fell, catching herself against the rough bark of a nearby tree. The smoke became stronger as she walked, not the pleasant campfire smoke she was accustomed to, but something acrid and chemical, burning fuel, burning metal, burning rubber. Her eyes began to water slightly. The scanner continued its constant chatter, military voices reporting distances and coordination information. Emma realized that the rescue team was probably only minutes away now. If she was going to do this, she had to do it quickly. The forest suddenly opened up. Emma pushed through a final wall of brush and found herself at the edge of a small ravine. And there, maybe 50 yards down the slope, surrounded by splintered trees and blackened earth, was the F-16. For a moment, Emma couldn't breathe. She'd seen pictures of F-16s countless times, sleek, powerful aircraft painted in military gray and green. This one looked like a broken toy that had been stomped by a careless giant. The nose cone was crushed. The right wing was gone entirely, twisted metal hanging from the fuselage like broken bones. The canopy was shattered, with pieces of transparent material glinting in the fading light. The entire starboard side of the aircraft was blackened by fire, and smoke still rose from cracks in the frame. Emma's courage wavered for just a moment. This wasn't a video or a picture in a book. This was real. This was destruction on a scale that her 12-year-old mind struggled to comprehend. But then she thought about the voice on the radio. Phoenix Flight. Captain James Mitchell. A person. A human being who might be down there right now, injured and alone, waiting for help. Emma began her descent down the ravine. The slope was steep and treacherous. Loose rocks tumbled beneath her feet. She had to grab onto saplings and branches to keep from sliding all the way down. Twice she nearly lost her footing entirely, catching herself just in time. Her heart hammered in her chest, and her breath came in short, sharp gasps. As she got closer to the wreckage, the smell intensified. Burning fuel, scorched metal, and something else, something that made her stomach clench. The cockpit was embedded at an odd angle against a massive boulder, as if the rock had caught the aircraft mid-fall and prevented it from tumbling any further down the ravine. Emma reached the wreckage carefully, her small hands pressed against the warm metal of the fuselage. The surface was hot but not unbearably so. The fire had burned itself out some time earlier. She moved around toward the cockpit, where the canopy gaped open like a hungry mouth. And that's when she saw him. Captain James Mitchell was slumped in the ejection seat, his head tilted back at an unnatural angle. Blood had dried on his face, streaking down from a gash on his forehead. His flight suit was torn in several places, and Emma could see more blood staining the fabric near his ribs. His left arm hung limp at his side. His eyes were closed. He looked like he might be dead. Emma's breath caught in her throat, and for a terrifying moment she thought she was too late. She reached into the cockpit, her hand trembling, and pressed her small fingers against the pilot's neck, searching for a pulse. The training she'd learned from watching medical shows and YouTube videos came back to her. Carotid artery, right side of the neck. There a flutter, weak but present. "He's alive," Emma whispered to herself. "He's alive, he's alive, he's alive." The pilot's breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling in barely perceptible movements. The wound on his side looked serious. There was a lot of blood, but Emma tried not to focus on that. Instead, she focused on the radio. The aircraft's communication system was still partially functional, its faint green lights glowing in the gathering dusk. Emma reached into the cockpit, her small frame allowing her to squeeze through the damaged canopy opening. She located the radio handset, which dangled on its cord, and carefully extricated it from the wreckage without disturbing the pilot. The scanner at her shoulder still crackled with military transmissions. The Black Hawk helicopter was 7 minutes out, last she'd heard. The Rescue Coordination Center was continuing to dispatch ground teams. Multiple channels were active, all focused on the location of the downed F-16. Emma held the radio handset and took a breath. She pressed the transmit button. Nothing happened. The radio was damaged, its display dark. She tried again, pressing harder, but the transmitter appeared to be completely non-functional. No, this couldn't be happening. She was supposed to be helping, and now she was just standing here useless, while the pilot bled slowly in his cockpit. Then she saw it, a backup radio unit mounted in a different location in the cockpit. This one was slightly less damaged, though it had clearly taken impact damage. Emma carefully maneuvered it out of its mounting, her fingers fumbling with the connections. The LED display flickered to life. Green, weak signal but present. Emma's hands were shaking as she located the correct frequency, the one the military had been using in their transmissions. She pressed the button and raised the handset to her mouth. For a moment, she couldn't find her voice. What if they didn't believe her? What if they thought she was prank calling? What if? No, the pilot needed help. The words came out of her mouth before her fear could stop them. This is Emma. I found the pilot. He crashed. He's here. Please, someone answer." The response was immediate, confused and frantic. "Say again, your transmission. This frequency is for military emergency operations only." Emma's voice strengthened. Years of listening to military radio procedures, of studying the correct protocols, kicked into gear. She took another breath. "This is a civilian at the crash site of the F-16 that went down approximately 4 minutes ago in the Cascade Valley. The pilot is here. He's unconscious. He's bleeding. Please respond." For a moment there was silence on the frequency. Then the voice came back, suddenly sharp and focused. "Copy that, civilian. What is your name?" "Emma Chen. I'm 12 years old." "Emma Chen, this is Major David Torres with the Rescue Coordination Center. I need you to listen very carefully. Can you stay where you are?" "Yes," Emma said, looking down at Captain Mitchell's unconscious form. She reached out and gently checked his pulse again. Still there, still fighting. "Okay, Emma, you just did something incredibly brave. Now I need you to help us save this pilot's life. Can you do that?" Emma felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she forced them back. She had a job to do. She had a person who depended on her. "Yes, sir, I can do that." "Good. First, I need you to look at the pilot and tell me if he's breathing. Tell me everything you see." Emma leaned closer to Captain Mitchell, checking his breathing, examining the wound on his side, looking for other injuries. She reported everything in a clear, steady voice. His shallow breathing, the gash on his forehead, the blood on his flight suit, his unconscious state. With each piece of information she provided, she felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on her young shoulders. But she also felt something else, a sense of purpose. A sense that maybe, just maybe, she could actually help. That her passion for aviation, her love of planes and pilots, had led her to this exact moment for a reason. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows through the forest. The smoke continued to rise from the damaged aircraft. And 12-year-old Emma Chen sat in the cockpit of a broken F-16, a radio in her hand, giving Major Torres everything he needed to coordinate the rescue of Captain James Mitchell. She would be called Phoenix later. But in this moment, she was simply Emma, brave, determined, and absolutely refusing to let this pilot die alone in the darkness. Major David Torres had been conducting rescue operations for 23 years. He'd coordinated extractions from burning buildings, recovered climbers from impossible mountain terrain, and guided his teams through weather conditions that most people wouldn't willingly venture into. He'd learned to trust his instincts, to think quickly, and to manage chaos with the calm authority of someone who understood that panic was a contagion that could kill people faster than any injury. But in all his years, he'd never encountered anything quite like this. A 12-year-old girl at a crash site, providing ground-to-air communication for a Black Hawk rescue operation. "Say again, Emma," Torres said into his headset, his voice deliberately calm and measured. He was speaking from the Black Hawk's command station, a flying center of coordination where screens displayed data feeds, satellite maps, and real-time information about the rescue operation. Around him, specialists were working to triangulate Emma's exact location, update the helicopter crews, and prepare the rescue teams. "The pilot is definitely unconscious," Emma's young voice crackled through the speakers. Despite the radio static and the poor signal quality coming from the backup aircraft radio, Torres could hear the determination in her voice. And something else, something he recognized from his years working with trained rescue personnel. She was scared, but she was pushing through that fear because someone needed her. "His breathing is really shallow, and there's blood on his side, a lot of blood. I think he hit his head when he crashed. There's a cut on his forehead." Torres made notes, updating the medical profile. Unconscious, possible internal bleeding, head trauma. The data was grim, but it was valuable. It told him that time was critical, that Captain Mitchell needed medical intervention soon. It also told him that Emma's presence was making a crucial difference. Without her observations, they'd be flying into this rescue blind, with no idea what condition the pilot would be in. "You're doing great, Emma," Torres said, and he meant it. "I need to know something. Can you tell me what color the pilot's flight suit is?" There was a slight pause. "Gray with a name patch. It says Mitchell." Torres nodded to himself. "Captain James Mitchell. Confirmed." The pilot's identity was verified by an eyewitness. A civilian, yes, but an eyewitness nonetheless. "Emma, I want you to know that what you're doing right now is incredibly important. We have a Black Hawk helicopter heading to your location. It's going to take us about 6 more minutes to reach you. When we get there, I'm going to need you to keep talking to us. I'm going to need your eyes on the ground to help us land safely and extract the pilot. Can you do that?" "Yes," Emma said immediately. "I can do it." Torres made a decision in that moment. A decision that would normally be considered unconventional. But conventions were for situations where everything was predictable, and this situation was anything but predictable. "Emma, from this moment forward, you have an official designation. You're part of this rescue operation. Your call sign is Phoenix. Do you understand?" There was a slight catch in Emma's voice when she responded. "Phoenix." "Phoenix," Torres confirmed. "You know why?" Because of the aircraft." "No," Torres said. "Because you're rising from the ashes of this disaster. You're representing hope. You're representing life. And most importantly, you're representing the courage it takes to do the right thing when it would be easier to do nothing." Through the speaker in the Black Hawk's command center, Torres could hear something that sounded suspiciously like Emma Chen crying. Not loud, just a soft sound, as if she were overwhelmed by the moment. He gave her a moment to compose herself before continuing. "Call sign Phoenix, I'm going to give you a few critical tasks. First, I need you to keep monitoring the pilot's condition. Every few minutes, check that he's still breathing. Check his pulse. If anything changes, if he stops breathing, if he becomes conscious, if he moves, I need you to tell me immediately. Understand?" "Understand," Emma said, her voice clearer now, steadier. "Second, I need you to start giving us landmarks. You're going to be our ground control. The helicopter is going to need to land somewhere near that crash site, but we need to find a clear area. Can you look around and tell me what the terrain looks like near you?" Emma was quiet for a moment, and Torres could imagine her looking around at the forest, trying to assess it the way trained personnel would. When she spoke again, she sounded like she was thinking aloud, processing information like a scientist analyzing data. The crash site is in kind of a ravine. There are big trees all around, but wait, I can see something. To the east, maybe 100 yards away, there's a clearing. It's small, but it looks flat. There's grass and some rocks, but it looks clear of trees. Torres immediately relayed this information to the pilot. A clearing to the east, approximately 100 yards from the crash site. Not ideal, but workable. The Black Hawk pilots were the best in the military, and they trained extensively for exactly this kind of challenging landing. "Phoenix, that's excellent," Torres said. "Can you stay in visual contact with that clearing while we approach?" "Yes, sir, I can see it." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. The Black Hawk was getting closer, its ETA now down to 4 minutes. The rescue specialists were suiting up, preparing their extraction equipment. Medical teams at the nearest military hospital were being briefed on the incoming patient. Ground rescue teams were positioning themselves to move in if the helicopter extraction became impossible. And through it all, Emma Chen's voice remained on the frequency, calm and steady, providing updates and information. "I'm checking the pilot's pulse again," she reported. "It's weak but still there. His breathing is still very shallow, I think he might have broken ribs. The way he's breathing seems painful." Torres made mental notes, updating the medical readiness profile for the hospital. Possible rib fractures, potential pneumothorax, definitely internal bleeding. This pilot was living on borrowed time. "Phoenix, how are you holding up?" Torres asked, remembering to check on his unusual ground team member. "I'm okay," Emma said. Then more quietly, "I'm scared, but I'm okay." "Fear is good," Torres told her. "Fear means you understand what's at stake. Fear means you're going to focus and do everything right. I have complete confidence in you, Phoenix." He could hear the smallest tremor in her voice when she responded, "Thank you, Major." Through the helicopter's sensors, the pilot reported visual contact with the valley. Torres fed Emma's information directly to the flight crew, the clearing to the east, the crash site location, the terrain challenges. The helicopter adjusted its approach vector accordingly. 1 minute out, the pilot reported. "Phoenix, the helicopter is almost here," Torres said. "When it arrives, it's going to be loud, really loud. The rotor blades create a tremendous amount of wind. Can you handle that?" "Yes, sir," Emma said. "I've studied Black Hawk specifications. I know what to expect." Torres had to smile at that. This girl had been listening to military frequencies and studying aircraft. Of course, she knew what a Black Hawk sounded like. "The helicopter is going to circle your position first to assess the landing zone and get a visual on Captain Mitchell. Then it's going to move toward that clearing you spotted. I'm going to be guiding the pilot in. I need you to keep your eyes on that clearing and report any obstacles I might have missed. Can you do that?" "I can do it," Emma confirmed. And then the world erupted into sound. The Black Hawk broke through the clouds above the valley, its rotors creating a wall of noise that echoed off the mountains. The helicopter descended rapidly, its searchlight cutting through the gathering darkness to illuminate the crash site. Emma shielded her eyes from the intense light, but she kept her attention focused on the clearing to the east. "The landing zone is clear," she reported into her radio. "No obstacles, look safe." Torres relayed the information to the pilot, who nodded and angled the helicopter toward the clearing Emma had identified. The aircraft descended slowly, carefully, the pilot's hands making micro-adjustments to account for wind shear and terrain. The moment was here. The rescue operation was beginning, and a 12-year-old girl named Emma Chen, who had become a Black Hawk rescue team member in the space of less than an hour, was about to play the most critical role in determining whether Captain James Mitchell lived or died. "Phoenix," Torres said into the radio, his voice steady and confident, "let's bring our pilot home." The Black Hawk helicopter descended into the valley like a mechanical beast, its rotors churning the air into submission. But the valley itself seemed determined to resist. Wind shear created invisible pockets of turbulence that grabbed at the aircraft and tried to push it sideways. The helicopter's pilot, Captain Marcus Webb, was one of the best in the military, but even his considerable skill was being tested by the hostile air currents. "Come on, baby," Webb muttered under his breath, making minute adjustments to his cyclic control. The helicopter shuddered and corrected, dropping another 50 feet. The altimeter unwound steadily. 2,000 feet, 1,800 feet, 1,600 feet. In the Black Hawk's command center, Major Torres was feeding him continuous updates from Emma's observations. "Phoenix reports the landing zone is still clear," Torres said calmly into his headset. "Minor wind gusts from the northeast. She says the clearing is approximately 50 yards ahead and to your left." "Copy that," Webb replied. "I see the clearing. Wind is brutal down here." Another gust hit the helicopter hard, and it lurched violently to the right. For just a moment, the nose pointed directly toward the mountainside. Webb's hands moved instinctively, correcting course with the kind of practiced precision that only comes from thousands of hours in the cockpit. The helicopter straightened out. Below, Emma watched the massive aircraft circle and descend. She'd known the Black Hawk was loud. Her research had prepared her for that. But nothing could have truly prepared her for the actual experience. The rotor blades created a sound like an endless thunderstorm, and the wind from the rotors nearly knocked her over. She had to brace herself against a nearby tree, her small frame pressed against the bark, to keep from being blown away. "The wind is really strong down here," she reported into her radio, her voice raised to be heard over the rotor noise. "The trees are bending. There's debris flying everywhere." Torres processed this information and relayed it to Webb. The pilot nodded grimly. This was exactly the kind of challenging condition that separated good pilots from great pilots. Webb had trained for this. He'd done hover operations in worse conditions. He could do this. "Phoenix, the helicopter is going to move over the clearing now," Torres said. "It's going to be louder for a minute, but that's normal. Stay focused on Captain Mitchell. Report any changes in his condition." Emma pressed the radio closer to her ear, trying to hear Torres over the incredible noise. She turned back toward the crash site, where the F-16's twisted frame was lit by the helicopter's powerful searchlight. The beam of light made everything look stark and unreal, like something from a nightmare. That's when she noticed a change in Captain Mitchell. His eyes were moving behind his closed eyelids. His head turned slightly, his body tensed. "Major," Emma called urgently. "Major, the pilot is waking up. His eyes are moving, his body is moving." "Copy that, Phoenix," Torres said. The news was both good and bad. Good because it meant Mitchell had brain activity and was fighting back toward consciousness. Bad because a conscious, injured pilot in shock could be unpredictable and difficult to manage during an extraction. "Phoenix, if Captain Mitchell becomes fully conscious, your job is to keep him calm. Talk to him. Tell him his name. Tell him that rescue is here. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Emma said, though her heart was now pounding even faster than before. Mitchell's eyes opened suddenly, and he looked directly at Emma. For a moment, confusion flooded his features. His pupils were dilated, and his gaze seemed unfocused, unable to quite process what he was seeing. A small girl's face hovering over him in the darkness, lit by the distant searchlight of a helicopter. "Where?" Mitchell's voice was hoarse and weak, barely audible over the rotor noise. "Where am I?" "Sir, your name is Captain James Mitchell," Emma said, speaking slowly and clearly, trying to project calm authority despite being terrified. "You're a pilot. Your F-16 crashed about 30 minutes ago. I'm Emma. A rescue helicopter is coming to get you. You need to stay still and stay calm." Mitchell's eyes tried to focus on her face. Did I eject?" "No, sir," Emma said honestly. "But help is here, just stay with me." Pain suddenly seemed to register in Mitchell's consciousness. His face contorted and he gasped in agony. His right hand moved toward his left side, where the worst of his injuries were. Emma gently but firmly caught his wrist. "Sir, don't move. You have injuries. Moving will make them worse. I know it hurts, but you have to stay still." The helicopter descended further, now only about 200 feet above the ground. The wind became even more turbulent. Captain Webb was sweating now, his eyes locked on his instruments and the terrain below. Every micro-adjustment mattered. One mistake and the helicopter could clip a tree or lose stability entirely. 30 seconds to the clearing, Tors counted down. Phoenix, confirm the landing zone is still clear. Emma forced herself to look away from the struggling pilot and focus on the clearing. Her eyes scanned the area where the helicopter was approaching. Rocks, grass, and... "Wait," she called out. "There's a branch." A big branch fell in the clearing. It must have blown down by the wind from the rotor blades. Tors relayed this information to Webb. The pilot immediately adjusted approach, angling the helicopter to avoid the branch. The helicopter descended, and the rear landing skids came down toward the grass. Below, Mitchell's eyes were starting to close again. The pain, combined with his injured state, was pulling him back toward unconsciousness. "Captain Mitchell, stay with me," Emma said urgently. "Stay with me. The helicopter is landing. Your rescue team is coming. You have to stay awake." I'm so cold," Mitchell whispered. His eyes flickered. "Sarah, tell Sarah." "Tell her yourself when you get to the hospital," Emma said firmly. "You're going to make it, but you have to focus. You have to stay conscious. Look at me. Look at my eyes." Mitchell's gaze found hers again. Emma forced herself to hold his attention, speaking continuously, telling him about the rescue teams, about the doctors who would help him, about how close they were to getting him to safety. The helicopter's skids touched the ground. The pilots cut the engines to idle, and the rotor blades began their slow descent from combat speed. The sudden reduction in noise was almost disorienting. "Landing successful," Webb reported. "Medical team is deploying." Tor's voice came back into Emma's ears, calm and reassuring. "Phoenix, excellent work. The rescue team is moving toward your position now. Stay with Captain Mitchell. Keep him conscious and calm until they arrive." The medical team burst from the helicopter, running through the clearing toward the ravine where the crash site was located. There were 4 of them, Sergeant Marcus Hayes leading the charge, with 3 combat medics right behind him. They carried specialized medical equipment, stretchers, and everything needed for a trauma extraction. "I can see them coming," Emma reported. "They're running toward us." Mitchell's eyes were closing again, and Emma was losing him. She reached out and took his hand, his uninjured right hand, and squeezed gently. "Captain Mitchell, look at me. The medics are almost here. They're going to take care of you. My name is Emma, and I'm going to be listening on the radio the whole time. You're not alone. You hear me? You're not alone." Mitchell's lips moved, trying to form words. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Phoenix." Emma felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't look away from his eyes. "You're going to make it, sir. I promise you're going to make it." The sound of boots on rocks announced the arrival of the rescue team. Sergeant Hayes reached the cockpit first, his trained eyes immediately assessing the situation. He saw the young girl, the unconscious pilot, the devastated aircraft, and everything clicked into place. "You're Emma?" he asked, already beginning his initial assessment of Mitchell's injuries. "Yes, sir," Emma said. "His name is Captain James Mitchell. He's been unconscious mostly, but he woke up a few minutes ago. He has a head wound, his left side is bleeding badly, and he said something about pain in his ribs. His left arm is definitely broken." Hayes looked at the girl with new respect. She'd done a complete medical assessment and reported it like a trained observer. "You did good, kid. Real good. We've got him from here." But Emma didn't let go of Mitchell's hand immediately. She looked down at the pilot's face, peaceful now as he drifted back into unconsciousness and spoke softly into the radio. "Major Torres, the rescue team has the pilot. He's in good hands now." "Copy that, Phoenix," Torres replied. "You just saved a man's life. Are you ready for extraction?" Emma looked back at the Black Hawk, still hovering above the clearing, its rescue rope waiting to bring her to safety. She nodded, though no one could see her in the darkness. "Yes, sir, Major, I'm ready." Sergeant Marcus Hayes was a trauma medic with 12 years of combat medical experience. He'd worked in field hospitals in Afghanistan, treated wounded soldiers on the front lines, and saved lives in conditions that would make most people's hands shake. But standing in front of the twisted F-16 wreckage, with the pilot's life hanging in the balance and the weight of a critical decision resting on his assessment, Hayes felt the familiar pressure that came with being humanity's last line of defense between someone and death. He immediately began his primary survey, his hands moving with practiced efficiency across Captain Mitchell's body. The pilot was unconscious again, his breathing labored and shallow. Hayes checked for responsiveness, none. He checked the airway patent, but barely. He checked for severe bleeding, found it on the left side where Mitchell's rib cage had been crushed against the cockpit wall. "He's got massive internal bleeding," Hayes called to his team. "Possible hemothorax. Get me a chest decompression kit." One of the medics, Private Rodriguez, immediately handed over the equipment. Hayes worked with surgical precision, preparing to stabilize Mitchell's collapsed chest cavity. But first, he had to assess the full extent of the damage. "Emma," Hayes said, glancing at the girl still standing nearby, "I need you to stay on the radio and keep Major Torres informed. Tell him we've got a pilot with traumatic chest injuries, possible internal bleeding, and a severe head wound. Tell him we're going to need the hospital on standby for immediate surgery." "Yes, sir," Emma said, pressing the radio to her ear. She began relaying the information to Major Torres in a clear, steady voice that belied the fear she was feeling. Torres received the medical update and immediately contacted the nearest military hospital. A surgical team was already being mobilized. Helicopters were being readied for the secondary transport if needed. The entire system was now focused on getting Captain Mitchell to advanced medical care as quickly as possible. Back at the crash site, Hayes was working methodically through the extraction procedure. The cockpit had to be approached carefully. The aircraft was unstable, balanced against a boulder that could shift at any moment. Moving the pilot too quickly or carelessly could dislodge the entire wreckage and cause it to tumble further down the ravine. "Rodriguez, I need you to stabilize his spine," Hayes instructed. "His head hit the canopy hard. We're treating this as a potential spinal injury." Rodriguez moved into position, carefully securing Mitchell's head and neck with a cervical collar. The device was uncomfortable and potentially dangerous if applied incorrectly, but it was essential for preventing further spinal damage during transport. "Thompson, get me a stretcher ready," Hayes continued. "We're going to need to do a careful extraction from the cockpit. This bird's precarious." Private Thompson, the team's logistics specialist, was already unfolding a specialized extraction stretcher. It was collapsible, lightweight, but incredibly strong, designed specifically for situations like this where terrain and obstacles made conventional extraction impossible. Emma watched the medics work, impressed by their calm professionalism. She was still holding the radio, still connected to Major Torres high above in the Black Hawk, still serving as the crucial link between ground operations and command. "Major, the medics are saying the injuries are really serious," Emma reported. "They're putting some kind of collar on his neck. They're saying something about possible spinal damage." "Copy that, Phoenix," Torres said. "Tell Hayes I need an extraction timeline. How long until Captain Mitchell is ready for vertical evacuation?" Emma relayed the question to Hayes, who held up 5 fingers while still working on Mitchell's chest. 5 minutes. They needed 5 minutes to fully stabilize the pilot and prepare him for extraction. 5 minutes, Major, Emma said into the radio. Copy, Torres acknowledged. Captain Webb is maintaining hover position. Weather is holding steady for now, but I'm seeing some storm clouds moving in from the west. We need to move fast. Hayes's hands were steady as he completed the chest decompression. Blood had accumulated in Mitchell's pleural cavity, compressing his lungs and making it nearly impossible for him to breathe. By creating a small opening and allowing the pressure to release, Hayes was quite literally saving the pilot's life in real time. Mitchell's breathing became slightly easier, though still labored. Pulse is weak but present, Rodriguez reported. Blood pressure is dropping. We're losing him. Hayes's jaw tightened. They were running out of time. The internal bleeding was more severe than he'd initially assessed. Mitchell was going into hemorrhagic shock, his body losing blood faster than it could compensate. Get me 2 units of blood, Hayes commanded. Thompson, I need the extraction stretcher right now. The activity intensified. What had been a careful, methodical operation suddenly became a race against time. The medics moved with urgent precision, cutting away Mitchell's flight suit to assess the full extent of his injuries, starting an IV line with fluid resuscitation, preparing him for movement. Emma felt her heart rate spike as she listened to the urgency in Hayes's voice. She understood what it meant. Captain Mitchell was dying. Right now, at this moment, the pilot she'd saved from being alone was slipping away. Major Torres, she said into the radio, her voice trembling slightly. Major, the medic says Captain Mitchell is going into shock. He says we're running out of time. There was a moment of silence on the frequency. Then Torres came back, his voice sharp and commanding. Phoenix, relay to Sergeant Hayes that the hospital is standing by for immediate emergency surgery. Tell him we're prepared for immediate extraction. Ask him for his status. Emma relayed the message, and Hayes responded without looking up from his work. 60 seconds. Patient stabilized enough to move, requesting immediate vertical evacuation. Copy that, Torres said. Captain Webb, did you copy? We need immediate extraction. 60 seconds. Copy, Webb replied. Extraction personnel standing by, deploying cable now. Above the crash site, the Black Hawk's side door opened, and the rescue cable began to descend rapidly. It was a thick, reinforced rope with a special harness attached, designed to carry humans safely from ground to aircraft. The harness swayed slightly as it lowered, spinning gently in the rotor wash. Cable is down, Hayes reported. Get me that harness now. The medics carefully positioned Mitchell on the extraction stretcher. His body was a patchwork of injuries, bandaged, stabilized, but critically fragile. One wrong movement during extraction, and they could undo all the work they'd done to save his life. Hayes personally secured Mitchell to the harness, making sure every connection was correct, every strap was tight. He'd done this 100 times in training, but never with someone so critically injured. One mistake and Mitchell would fall. Patient secured, Hayes reported into his radio, requesting immediate vertical extraction. Copy, Torres said. Pilot, bring him up, slowly and steadily. Phoenix, keep your eyes on the extraction. Report any problems. Emma moved to a position where she could see both the crash site and the cable above. She watched as the harness, with Captain Mitchell secured to it, began its ascent. Cable is rising, Emma narrated. Patient is leaving the crash site. No problems so far. He's about 20 feet up, 30 feet, moving steady. Mitchell's unconscious body rose slowly but surely toward the hovering Black Hawk. The harness swayed slightly in the wind, but Hayes's secure fastening held. The medics on the ground watched their patient ascend, knowing they'd done everything they could, and now it was up to the people in the helicopter. Patient is entering the aircraft, Emma reported. The rescue team is pulling him in. He's in the helicopter now. Major, he made it. He made it to the helicopter. In the Black Hawk's medical bay, A second team of paramedics received Mitchell's stretcher and immediately began their own assessment and treatment. They had oxygen equipment, more advanced IV lines, and the ability to provide continuous medical care during the flight to the hospital. Hayes, still on the ground, pressed his radio transmit button. "Tell Phoenix she kept that pilot alive. Tell her without her observations and guidance, we would have lost him. Tell her she's a hero." Torres smiled slightly, the first genuine smile since this operation had begun. He keyed his radio. "Phoenix, did you hear that?" "Yes, sir," Emma said quietly. "I heard it." "That's a medic with 12 years of experience telling you that you saved a man's life. Remember that, Phoenix. Remember it for the rest of your life." The Black Hawk began to climb, carrying Captain James Mitchell toward the hospital and surgery and a second chance at life. A second chance that wouldn't exist without a brave 12-year-old girl named Emma Chen and the call sign Phoenix. The extraction harness rose steadily through the night air, carrying Captain James Mitchell upward toward the hovering Black Hawk. Emma stood at the crash site, her neck craned back, watching the unconscious pilot ascend. The searchlight from the helicopter illuminated his body suspended in midair, making him look almost unreal, like a ghost ascending toward heaven rather than a man fighting his way back to life. "Patient is rising," Emma reported into her radio, her young voice steady despite the enormity of what she was witnessing. 20 feet, 30 feet. The harness is stable. No problems so far." High above, in the Black Hawk's medical bay, the extraction team stood ready. Paramedics with advanced life support equipment, another trauma specialist, and a flight nurse all positioned themselves to receive Mitchell the moment the harness came within reach. The helicopter held its hover position as carefully as humanly possible, but the wind shears that had plagued Captain Webb throughout the approach were still present, occasionally buffeting the aircraft and causing it to drift slightly. Webb made constant micro-adjustments, his hands moving across the controls with the sensitivity of a master surgeon. The Black Hawk weighed more than 10,000 pounds and had the aerodynamic profile of a brick. Keeping it steady in these conditions required absolute focus and years of training. 40 feet, Emma continued her narration. 50 feet, the patient is halfway there. Mitchell's body slowly rose higher. The harness cable stretched from the ground to the helicopter door, taut and secure. Every ounce of tension on that cable represented critical life-saving equipment. The harness itself was rated for more than 1,500 pounds of force, and Mitchell was nowhere near that. But his injuries made him fragile in ways that went far beyond mere physics. Then the wind hit. It came from the northeast, a sudden gust that wasn't predicted by the meteorological data the Black Hawk team had reviewed. The helicopter lurched violently to the left, and immediately the cable supporting Mitchell swung in an arc. The pilot's body, suspended from that cable, suddenly found itself moving through space, swaying back and forth like a pendulum. "Whoa," Emma cried out. "Major, the wind just pushed the helicopter. The patient is swinging." Tor's voice came back immediately, calm but intense. "Phoenix, describe the patient's position. Is the harness secure?" Emma's eyes followed the swinging form. Mitchell's body was rotating slightly, the harness holding but the movement violent and unpredictable. For a terrifying moment, Emma thought the cable might not hold. "The patient is swinging, left to right, but the harness is holding, it's holding, Major." In the helicopter, Webb was fighting the wind with everything he had. He pushed the cyclic control forward and to the right, trying to position the aircraft to create a counterbalance to the wind gust. The rotor blades tilted and shifted. The helicopter drifted slightly, moving with the wind rather than against it, reducing the relative wind pressure. "Maintain altitude," Torres commanded. "Hold your position." "Holding," Webb confirmed through gritted teeth. The cable steadied. Mitchell's body stopped its wild swinging. For a moment, everything hung in perfect, terrifying balance. The wind, the helicopter, the wounded pilot suspended between earth and sky. Patient is steadying, Emma reported. The swing is reducing. He's at 60 feet now, continuing to rise. The extraction team in the helicopter maintained their positions, hands ready to grab and secure the harness the moment it came close enough. This was the most dangerous phase, the moment when the patient was completely vulnerable, suspended in space, fully dependent on equipment and luck to reach safety. 70 feet, Emma continued. 80 feet, he's almost there. Mitchell's unconscious body continued its slow ascent. Even in his unconscious state, his body registered the movement. His hands clenched slightly, his face contorted as if in pain, but he remained unconscious, unaware of the precarious journey between ground and sanctuary. 90 feet, Emma said. 100 feet, he's at the aircraft door. In the Black Hawk's medical bay, the extraction team moved instantly. The senior paramedic, Chief Garcia, leaned out the open door and grabbed the harness frame. Two other team members reached out simultaneously, securing their grip on the equipment. With coordinated precision, they pulled the stretcher inward. Patient is entering the aircraft, Emma reported, her voice rising slightly with emotion. They're pulling him in. He's inside. Major, he made it. He made it to the helicopter. Inside the aircraft, the team moved with explosive efficiency. The harness was detached in seconds. Mitchell's stretcher was secured to the helicopter's medical mounting system. The flight nurse, a woman named Lieutenant Sarah Moore who had 15 years of medical evacuation experience, immediately began her assessment. What she found alarmed her. "We've got severe hemothorax, possible pneumothorax on the right side," Moore reported to her commander. "Patient is in shock. BP is dropping. We need to move now." Tor's voice cut through the frequency. "Captain Webb, you're cleared for immediate transport. Full power to the hospital. Phoenix, did you copy that?" Emma felt her stomach clench. "Yes, sir, Major. The helicopter is leaving. They're taking him to the hospital." "That's right," Tor said. "And that's because of you, Phoenix. You did your job perfectly. Now we need to get you out of there as well." Emma looked up as the Black Hawk began to climb, its nose tilting forward as Captain Webb pushed the aircraft to maximum speed toward the military hospital 40 miles to the north. The searchlight swept across the forest, illuminating the treetops as the helicopter banked and climbed higher into the night sky. Mitchell was gone. The pilot she'd kept alive, guided, and fought for was now being rushed toward emergency surgery. She would never know if he survived. She would never know if the injuries were too severe, if the internal bleeding was too extensive, if the head trauma was irreversible. All she knew was that she'd given him a chance. Below at the crash site, Sergeant Hayes and his team were already breaking down their medical equipment. The immediate rescue operation was complete. Mitchell was in the hands of flight medics and surgeons now. The next phase of his fight for life would happen in an operating room, not in a crashed fighter jet in a remote valley. "Phoenix, what's your status?" Torres asked. "Are you ready for extraction?" Emma looked around the crash site, at the twisted F-16, at the medics' packing equipment, at the dark forest surrounding her. She realized with a start that she was exhausted. Her hands were shaking. Her mind felt foggy. The adrenaline that had carried her through the past hour was finally wearing off. "Yes, sir, Major," she said. "I'm ready." "We're sending the cable back down for you," Torres said. "The extraction team will secure you in the harness, and we'll have you up in the helicopter in about 2 minutes. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Emma said. As she waited for the cable to descend, Emma stood alone at the crash site for just a moment. She looked at the shattered remains of the F-16, at the scorch marks on the earth from the impact and fire, at the debris field scattered through the forest. This place had been a tomb just hours ago, a place where a man was trapped between life and death. Now it was just wreckage. The cable descended and touched the ground nearby. Two of Hayes's medics, Rodriguez and Thompson, immediately moved to secure Emma. They explained the harness, how it would feel, what she should expect. Emma listened carefully, remembering everything, processing information the way she'd been doing all night. Rodriguez secured the harness around her small frame. It was oversized, designed for adult bodies, but he made the adjustments carefully. "You're going to be okay," he said gently. "You're going to be in that helicopter in a minute and then you're done. You can rest." Emma nodded. She keyed her radio one more time. "Major Torres, I'm secured in the extraction harness, ready for vertical evacuation." "Copy that, Phoenix," Torres replied. "Captain Webb is bringing the helicopter back. Get ready." The cable tightened, and suddenly Emma's feet left the ground. The sensation of weightlessness was strange and exhilarating. She found herself rising through the night air, the forest falling away beneath her, the Black Hawk descending to meet her. As she ascended, Emma looked down at the crash site one last time. In the beam of the searchlight, the F-16 looked small and insignificant now, just debris, just metal and broken dreams. But it had been real. The danger had been real. The pilot's injuries had been real. And her role in saving his life had been real. Emma rose higher, 50 feet, 75 feet, 100 feet. The Black Hawk descended to meet her, its rotors cutting through the night air. The extraction team was already positioned in the open door, ready to receive her. As Emma's harness reached the helicopter's threshold, strong hands reached out and guided her inside. The roar of the rotors intensified as the aircraft began to climb, leaving the crash site far below, carrying Emma Chen, Phoenix, toward home and safety and a whole new understanding of what courage meant. Major Torres' voice crackled through the headset one final time. "Welcome aboard, Phoenix. Good work out there. The best work I've seen in 20 years. You did real good." Emma, finally safe, finally secure, finally relieved of the terrible responsibility that had rested on her young shoulders for the past hour, allowed herself to cry. 6 weeks later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the Joint Base Lewis McChord Officers Club, bathing the grand hall in brilliant light. The space had been transformed for the occasion. Flags hung from the ceiling, a podium stood at the front of the auditorium, and row after row of folding chairs held military personnel, rescue team members, families, and media representatives. Captain James Mitchell sat backstage in a dress uniform, his left arm still in a cast, but his body far more stable than it had been 6 weeks ago. He'd spent those weeks in the intensive care unit, underwent 2 emergency surgeries to repair his internal bleeding and stabilize his rib fractures, and endured a long recovery process that tested every ounce of his physical and mental strength. The head wound had left him with mild concussion symptoms and lingering headaches, but the neurosurgeons had confirmed that there was no permanent brain damage. He was alive. Against odds that had been catastrophically poor, he was alive. And he owed that life to a 12-year-old girl with a scanner and a brave heart. Mitchell stood slowly, carefully, his movements still slightly painful but improving every day. His daughter, Sarah, waited for him just outside the backstage area. When she saw him stand, she rushed over and gave him the gentlest hug possible, mindful of his injuries but not able to contain her relief and joy that her father was alive. "You ready, Dad?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Mitchell replied. He looked down at his dress uniform, at the neat rows of medals on his chest, at the polished insignia of his rank. In a few minutes, he would walk out to that podium and face an auditorium full of people. But first, he wanted to see her. He wanted to thank her in person. In the auditorium, Emma Chen sat in the front row next to her parents. She wore a dress that her mother had insisted on, a formal gray dress that made her look older than her 12 years. Her father had tied her hair back carefully, and her mother had even managed to get her to wear a small amount of makeup, though Emma had protested about that. Emma was terrified. She'd returned home the night of the rescue to a scene of controlled chaos. Her parents had been waiting anxiously at the camp, worried out of their minds about where she'd gone. When the rescue team had delivered her back to them, they'd held her for what felt like hours, crying and laughing and asking 1,000 questions all at once. The story had spread quickly. A 12-year-old girl had used an aviation scanner to guide military rescue teams to a crashed F-16 and had kept the pilot alive until extraction. The media had picked it up, and suddenly Emma found herself being called a hero. News outlets wanted interviews. The military had requested a formal commendation ceremony. Everyone wanted to know about the brave girl who'd saved a pilot's life. Emma had never wanted any of it. She'd just done what seemed right at the time. She'd helped someone who needed helping. That was all. But here she was, in a dress, in an auditorium full of military personnel, about to be officially recognized for what she'd done that night in the forest. Major David Torres stepped up to the podium. In his dress uniform, with his medals and insignia prominently displayed, he cut an impressive figure. But his eyes were warm when he looked down at Emma and smiled. "Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen," Torres began, his voice carrying through the auditorium with the authority of someone accustomed to command. "We're gathered here today for a very special occasion. We're gathered to honor someone who, in a moment of crisis, made a decision that saved a life. That person is 12-year-old Emma Chen." A murmur rippled through the audience. People turned to look at the small girl in the front row, who suddenly felt very exposed and very aware of all those eyes on her. Torres continued, his words carefully chosen. On the evening of June 23rd, a U.S. Air Force F-16 experienced a catastrophic engine failure over remote terrain in the Cascade Range. The pilot, Captain James Mitchell, lost consciousness, and the aircraft began an uncontrolled descent. By all accounts, this should have been a fatal incident. But that night, a young girl with a passion for aviation and a scanner heard the emergency frequencies. Instead of staying safe, instead of waiting for adults to handle the situation, Emma Chen made her way to the crash site. Torres looked directly at Emma as he spoke. Emma found Captain Mitchell unconscious and bleeding in the cockpit. She could have run away. She could have been scared and done nothing. But instead, she did something extraordinary. She made radio contact with rescue coordination. She provided critical medical information. She guided a Black Hawk helicopter through dangerous conditions. She kept a dying man alive through nothing but her voice, her courage, and her determination. The room was completely silent now. Even the journalists with their cameras seemed transfixed. The rescue teams tell me that without Emma's observations and guidance, Captain Mitchell would have died before they could reach him. The medics tell me that her calm under pressure and her detailed medical assessments made the difference between life and death. Major David Torres, no relation, the rescue operation commander, has told me that in 23 years of rescue operations, he has never seen anything like what Emma Chen accomplished that night. Torres gestured, and Captain Mitchell began walking out from the wings. He moved carefully, his left arm in its cast, but he was walking under his own power. The auditorium erupted in applause. When Mitchell reached the podium, Torres stepped back slightly, giving the pilot the space to speak. Mitchell looked out at the audience, then down at Emma in the front row. For a moment his eyes became slightly wet, and he had to clear his throat before he could speak. "6 weeks ago I was dying," Mitchell said quietly. The audience leaned forward to hear him. "I've flown fighter jets for 18 years. I've faced challenges that would terrify most people. I've ejected from aircraft, survived mechanical failures, and pushed myself to the limits of human capability. But I've never faced anything like what that night brought." He looked directly at Emma. "The first person I remember seeing clearly after I regained consciousness was this girl, Emma Chen. I remember being confused, in pain, wondering if I was dying or already dead. And then I heard her voice telling me that help was coming, that she wouldn't let me give up, that I had a daughter waiting for me." Mitchell's voice cracked slightly. "This young lady kept me alive, not with medical equipment or advanced technology, but with her voice, her presence, and her courage. She did something that many trained military personnel wouldn't have done. She stepped up when it mattered most. Mitchell extended his right hand, and Emma stood and walked toward the podium. When she reached him, he took her hand gently and shook it. But then he did something that seemed to surprise everyone. He pulled her into a careful hug, mindful of his injuries but wanting her to feel the full weight of his gratitude. The auditorium exploded in applause. People stood. Cameras flashed. Emma felt tears streaming down her face as she hugged the man she'd saved. When they separated, Major Torres stepped back to the podium. Emma Chen, on behalf of the United States Air Force, the Department of Defense, and this rescue team, I am proud to present you with the Air Force Commendation Medal for heroism and outstanding service in support of military operations. Torres pinned the medal onto Emma's dress. It was a small piece of metal and ribbon, but it represented something much larger, the recognition that courage and heroism come in all forms, at all ages, and in all uniforms. Furthermore, Torres continued, the rescue team has voted unanimously to grant you an official military call sign. You will be known from this day forward as Phoenix, a name that represents rising from disaster, representing hope, and representing the best of what it means to be human. When the ceremony concluded, Emma stood backstage with Captain Mitchell. He looked at her with eyes full of gratitude and wonder. "Thank you," he said simply. "I have a second chance at life because of you. I get to see my daughter grow up. I get to keep flying. I get to wake up every morning and experience life. And that's all because a 12-year-old girl heard an emergency call and decided to help." Emma looked up at the man she'd saved. 6 weeks ago, he'd been a stranger, just a voice on the radio and a body in a crashed cockpit. Now he was standing in front of her in dress uniform, his eyes full of tears, his hand on her shoulder. "I was scared," Emma admitted. "I was really scared." "So was I," Mitchell said. "But you were brave anyway. That's what makes you a hero, Emma, being brave when you're scared, being willing to help when it would be easier to hide, being the kind of person who answers the call when someone needs you." Emma thought about that night in the forest. She thought about the crash site, the wreckage, the blood, the danger. She thought about how she'd been terrified but had done what needed to be done anyway. "In a few years, you're going to be old enough to think about joining the Air Force," Mitchell continued. "And if you do, I want you to know that you'll be the best pilot we have, because you already know what it takes to save a life. You already know what courage really means." Emma smiled despite her tears. "Maybe I will," she said. As she stood there looking at Captain James Mitchell, the man she'd heard calling a mayday, the man she'd found in the wreckage, the man she'd kept alive through nothing but her voice, Emma realized something important. Heroism didn't require a uniform. It didn't require rank or training or years of experience. It required only one thing: the willingness to do what was right, even when it was hard, even when you were scared, even when everyone would understand if you did nothing. She had answered the call, and in answering it, she'd found out who she really was. Phoenix.
Lo fai come? È ancora sabato e domenica, muoviti. Sì, sì. Buongiorno a casa, buongiorno tesoro. Ciao patato. Mi sono perso, stavo cercando la domanda di caso. Sì, comunque Ark Riders, buongiorno Wave, ciao tesoro. Come stai? Come te lo godi questo fine settimana? Sento la serenità di Wave nel pensare che finalmente ha 2 giorni a casa. Oh.